Who doesn't love a truck?
Imagine a truck so powerful, so efficient, it rules the roads of Europe, but can never touch U.S. soil. Scania trucks, renowned for their luxury, fuel efficiency, and unbeatable performance, are banned from the U.S. But why? Is it politics, a dangerous game of trade wars, or something darker lurking behind the scenes?
2014. Den var färdig 2016.
Ja, 2 år sedan renovering.
Ja. Det är för bil och släp då.
Ja, för bil. Okej. Hur var skicket på bil och släp?
Scania trucks have long been the pride of Europe, dominating the roads with their distinctive design, efficiency, and performance. But despite their widespread success on the continent, Scania trucks are virtually unknown in the United States. For decades, truck enthusiasts have wondered why these giants of the road, which seem to embody the very best of European engineering, are not available for purchase in the US. Could it be politics, safety regulations? Or is there something deeper at play that's been kept hidden for years? Today, we're diving into the reasons why Scania trucks, despite their fame and success, cannot be found in the US, exploring everything from regulations to trade wars and the influence of corporate decisions. Scania, a Swedish company founded back in 1891, is one of Europe's most successful and trusted truck manufacturers. Over the years, it has earned a reputation for its fuel-efficient models, luxurious driver cabs, and high reliability. The company holds a solid 20% market share in the European trucking industry, making it a major player. Trucks like the Scania R500 are often seen as icons within the trucking community, known for their impressive performance and ability to tackle long-haul routes with ease. But despite their global dominance, Scania trucks are nowhere to be found on American roads. One of the biggest hurdles Scania faces when trying to enter the American market is the complex web of regulations that truck manufacturers must navigate in the U.S. The U.S. has some of the strictest regulations in the world when it comes to vehicle emissions and safety. Scania's trucks are designed to meet European standards which, while rigorous, differ significantly from those enforced by U.S. authorities. This mismatch of standards is a significant challenge. The Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, in the U.S. has extremely strict limits on nitrogen oxide, NOx, emissions, which are far more stringent than the limits set in Europe. For a company like Scania, retrofitting their truck engines to meet these higher standards would be an expensive and time-consuming process. It's estimated that meeting these regulations would cost millions of dollars, making it a less than attractive option for Scania. The cost of retrofitting and compliance would far outweigh any potential profits from selling trucks in the U.S. market. But emission standards are only one part of the problem. Safety regulations in the U.S. present another significant barrier. The Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, FMVSS, dictate the design requirements for all vehicles sold in the U.S., and these standards are not easily met by European trucks. For example, the cab-over-engine design, which is commonly used in Europe, doesn't pass U.S. safety tests, particularly when it comes to frontal crash tests. In Europe, cab-overs are popular due to their compact size, making them ideal for the narrower roads and shorter routes typical of the region. However, in the U.S., the longer-nosed trucks, which provide more protection in the event of a crash, are the preferred design. Scania's cab-over trucks, while perfectly suited for Europe, do not meet U.S. standards for frontal crash safety, making them unsuitable for sale in the American market. In addition to the regulatory challenges, there's another major reason why Scania has never entered the U.S. market: the trade barriers that exist between the U.S. and foreign manufacturers. In the 1960s, a trade war resulted in the introduction of the so-called chicken tax, a 25% tariff on imported trucks and other commercial vehicles. This tariff was aimed at protecting U.S. manufacturers, particularly the big names like Freightliner, Peterbilt, and Kenworth, from foreign competition. The tariff was enacted to combat the European and Japanese imports that were flooding the market and threatening American manufacturing jobs. This chicken tax is still in place today, and it's one of the key factors that keeps Scania trucks off U.S. roads. To avoid the hefty import tax, Scania would need to establish a manufacturing facility within the U.S. to produce trucks locally. This would require massive investments, not only in infrastructure but also in compliance with U.S. regulations, which are vastly different from European standards. Given the size of the investment required and the risks involved, Scania has simply opted to focus its efforts on European and Asian markets where it already enjoys strong sales. The competition within the U.S. trucking industry is another critical factor in Scania's decision not to enter the market. Freightliner, Peterbilt, and Kenworth collectively control more than 95% of the U.S. market, making it incredibly difficult for any new players, especially foreign manufacturers, to gain a foothold. Scania's parent company, the Volkswagen Group, has also shown no interest in competing directly with these established brands in the U.S. market. For Volkswagen, the risk and cost of entering the U.S. trucking market simply don't seem worth it. Scania's existing success in Europe and Asia means that the company has little incentive to take on the costly and uncertain process of entering the American market. Another issue that has hindered Scania's ability to sell trucks in the U.S. is the cultural differences in what American truck drivers want and need. In the U.S., truck drivers often spend long days on the road, sometimes for weeks at a time. As a result, they tend to prefer long-nosed trucks, which offer more comfort and space for the driver. These trucks are also better suited for the highways and roads in the U.S., which are often much longer and wider than those in contrast, Scania's cab-over trucks, which are smaller and more compact, are seen as uncomfortable and cramped by many American drivers. Additionally, American diesel fuel is significantly cheaper than in Europe, which makes Scania's fuel-saving technologies less of a selling point. Despite these challenges, Scania's decision to remain focused on Europe and Asia is largely a strategic one. Analysts estimate that breaking into the U.S. market would require a massive investment of time and resources, likely a decade or more, before Scania could see any significant return on its investment. With an annual revenue of $15 billion, 0 cents from its European and Asian operations, Scania simply doesn't need to risk billions in an uncertain market. The company is far more profitable staying within the regions where it has a proven track record of success. When we look at the regulatory challenges that prevent Scania trucks from being sold in the U.S., one of the most significant barriers is the difference in emission standards between Europe and the United States. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, has some of the strictest emission controls in the world, especially when it comes to nitrogen oxide, NOx, emissions. These regulations are more stringent than those in Europe, where Scania trucks are designed to meet the European Union's environmental standards. The EPA's regulations are part of a broader effort to reduce air pollution and improve public health by limiting harmful emissions from all vehicles, including heavy-duty trucks. Specifically, the EPA has set a maximum limit for NOx emissions, which are a major contributor to air pollution and are linked to respiratory problems and other health issues. In Europe, the standards are somewhat more lenient. While the EU has its own set of regulations, they are not as strict as those imposed by the EPA, particularly in terms of the acceptable levels of NOx emissions. For Scania, meeting these U.S. emission standards would require significant changes to the engines in their trucks. The process of retrofitting Scania's existing engine designs to comply with the U.S. regulations would be expensive. Experts estimate that the cost of modifying Scania engines to meet U.S. NOx limits would run into the millions of dollars, if not more. This high cost of compliance makes it economically unfeasible for Scania to sell its trucks in the U.S., especially given the small market share they would likely capture. The financial burden of making these modifications would not be justified by the potential returns from a market that is already dominated by established American brands like Freightliner, Peterbilt, and Kenworth. But emission standards are not the only regulatory hurdle Scania faces when trying to enter the U.S. market. The Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, FMVSS, which govern the design and construction of vehicles in the U.S., also pose a significant challenge. The FMVSS require that all vehicles sold in the U.S. meet specific safety standards. These standards include requirements for things like bumper height, lighting, crash protection, and other critical safety features. One of the key safety features that Scania trucks lack in terms of U.S. standards is the design of their cabs. Scania trucks are built with a cab-over engine design, which is common in Europe. In this design, the engine is located directly beneath the driver's cab, allowing for a more compact truck. This design is especially useful in Europe, where roads are narrower and drivers need more maneuverable vehicles. The compact cab-over design makes it easier to navigate tight spaces and smaller streets. For a company like Scania, which has invested heavily in perfecting its trucks for European markets, redesigning their vehicles to meet U.S. safety standards would be a huge financial commitment. The cost of modifying the trucks to pass these safety tests would be significant, and the return on investment might not be enough to justify such an expensive and time-consuming process. As a result, Scania has opted to focus its resources on markets where it already has a strong presence, and where the regulatory requirements are more aligned with their existing truck designs. Another significant regulatory challenge Scania faces is the so-called chicken tax, a 25% tariff on imported trucks and other commercial vehicles. This tariff was implemented in the 1960s during a trade war between the US and several European countries, and it was designed to protect American manufacturers from foreign competition. The chicken tax, as it's known, has been a major barrier to foreign truck manufacturers trying to enter the US market, and it remains in place today. For Scania, the chicken tax is a major obstacle to entering the US market. In order to avoid the 25% tariff, Scania would need to establish a manufacturing plant in the US to produce its trucks locally. This would require a massive investment in both infrastructure and human resources. Setting up a production facility would not only be expensive, but it would also require Scania to comply with all the other US regulations, including the emissions and safety standards we've already discussed. Given the scale of the investment required, it's no surprise that Scania has not pursued this option. The company has calculated that the potential profits from the US market would not be enough to justify the enormous costs of setting up a manufacturing plant and navigating the complex regulatory environment. Instead, Scania has opted to focus on its core markets in Europe and Asia, where the regulatory landscape is more favorable and the costs of doing business are lower. In addition to the regulatory challenges, there are also cultural factors that play a role in Scania's decision not to sell trucks in the US. The preferences of American truck drivers differ significantly from those of European drivers. In the US, long-haul truck drivers often spend days, if not weeks, on the road. As a result, comfort is a major consideration for American drivers. US drivers prefer long-nosed trucks, which offer more space in the cab and provide a more comfortable driving experience on long trips. These trucks are also better suited for the wider and longer roads in the US. In contrast, Scania's cab-over trucks are designed to be more compact, which makes them ideal for Europe's narrower roads. While this design is great for European drivers who need a more maneuverable truck for short-haul trips, it's not as popular among US drivers. Many American truckers find the cab-over design to be cramped and uncomfortable, especially for long-distance travel. The compact cab doesn't offer the same level of space and comfort that US drivers expect, which further diminishes the appeal of Scania trucks in the US. Another factor that works against Scania in the US is the price of diesel fuel. In the US, diesel is significantly cheaper than it is in Europe, where the price of diesel is often much higher due to taxes and environmental regulations. Scania's trucks are known for their fuel efficiency, which is a major selling point in Europe, where fuel prices are high. However, in the US, where diesel is cheaper, fuel efficiency isn't as much of a selling point. American drivers are less concerned about saving fuel when it's more affordable to fill up their tanks. This cultural difference further reduces the appeal of Scania's fuel-saving technologies in the US. There are several additional factors that contribute to Scania's absence from the US market, some of which are rooted in historical trade barriers, while others stem from differences in the preferences of American truck drivers and the priorities of Scania's parent company, Volkswagen Group. One of the key obstacles that has kept Scania from entering the US market is the trade policy that has been in place for decades, particularly the so-called chicken tax. This 25% tariff was introduced in the 1960s as part of a broader trade dispute between the US and several European countries. The chicken tax was designed to protect US manufacturers from foreign competition, specifically targeting the importation of trucks and commercial vehicles. For Scania, this tariff presents a significant challenge. It makes it much more expensive to import trucks into the US, which would severely limit the company's ability to compete with domestic manufacturers. In order to avoid this hefty 25% tariff, Scania would need to establish a manufacturing facility within the US to produce its trucks locally. This is no small task. Setting up a manufacturing plant would require significant investment in infrastructure, labor, and production facilities, all of which would come at a high cost. Even then, Scania would need to ensure that the trucks produced in the US complied with the stringent emissions and safety standards that we've already discussed, which would require further investment and adaptation. This brings us to a crucial point. Why hasn't Scania taken the leap to establish a US manufacturing facility and overcome the chicken tax? The simple answer is that the financial risk does not seem worth it. The US trucking market is already dominated by well-established brands including Freightliner, Peterbilt, and Kenworth, which together control more than 95% of the market. These American manufacturers have deep roots in the country and have spent decades building their brand and reputation. For Scania, a foreign company, the prospect of breaking into this highly competitive market and taking on these entrenched players seems like an uphill battle, one that would require significant financial resources and time, likely a decade or more before the company could achieve a significant market share. This competitive environment is compounded by the fact that the US trucking industry has very specific needs that are shaped by the country's geography, road infrastructure, and driving culture. US drivers tend to spend long hours on the road, often traveling across vast distances from coast to coast. As a result, comfort is a major consideration for American truckers. American drivers prefer long-nosed trucks, which offer more space and comfort for the driver, especially on long-haul journeys. These trucks typically have larger cabs with more amenities, such as sleeping compartments and additional storage space, making them more suitable for the type of long-distance driving that is common in the US. Scania's trucks, on the other hand, are designed with a compact cab-over-engine layout, which is more common in Europe. In Europe, roads are often narrower, and truck drivers tend to drive shorter distances, so a more compact design makes sense. Scania's cab-over trucks are more maneuverable and easier to navigate through narrow city streets and winding country roads. However, this design is not as well suited to the US market, where drivers typically need more space and comfort for long hauls. The compact cab design of Scania's trucks is often seen as cramped and uncomfortable by American truck drivers who are used to the spacious interiors of long-nosed trucks. In addition to comfort, fuel efficiency is another key factor that American truckers consider when choosing a vehicle. Scania trucks are known for their excellent fuel efficiency, which is a major selling point in Europe, where diesel fuel prices are significantly higher than in the US. In Europe, the higher cost of fuel makes fuel-efficient trucks more attractive to companies and drivers who are looking to cut costs. However, in the US, where diesel fuel is relatively cheap compared to Europe, fuel efficiency is not as high on the list of priorities. American truckers are less concerned about fuel-saving technologies when the cost of diesel is low. As a result, Scania's emphasis on fuel efficiency does not hold the same appeal in the US as it does in Europe, further reducing the marketability of the brand in the US. This mismatch in consumer preferences is another reason why Scania has not made a serious push to enter the US market. Despite the company's impressive performance in Europe and Asia, it has to consider the unique needs and preferences of the American consumer. Trucking in the US is a different ballgame, and Scania's truck designs and features are simply not aligned with what US drivers are looking for. While Scania could potentially redesign its trucks to better suit American preferences, doing so would require significant time and investment, and given the competitive nature of the US market and the dominance of American manufacturers, the company may not see a sufficient return on investment to justify such a move. Another consideration in Scania's decision to avoid the US market is the strategy of its parent company, Volkswagen Group. Volkswagen has long been focused on its core markets in Europe and Asia, where it has a strong presence and has been able to build a profitable business. The company has little incentive to pour resources into a market where it has no established brand recognition and would face significant competition from well-established US manufacturers. In fact, analysts estimate that breaking into the US market would take Scania at least 10 years and billions of dollars before it could achieve meaningful market share. The financial risk is simply too great when compared to the profitability of continuing to focus on Europe and Asia, where the company's products are already in high demand. In light of all these factors, it's clear that Scania's absence from the US market is not a result of the company's inability to compete or a lack of quality in its products. Instead, it's the result of a combination of factors including trade barriers, regulatory challenges, cultural differences, and a highly competitive market. Scania could certainly enter the US market if it chose to, but but the financial and logistical challenges involved make it an unattractive option. The company has made a strategic decision to focus on markets where it already has a strong presence, and for now that means staying out of the US trucking market. While Scania's trucks may not be available in the US today, they continue to be a dominant force in Europe and Asia, where they are recognized for their quality, fuel efficiency, and reliability. For US truck drivers, the dream of driving a Scania truck may remain just that, a dream. But for those in Europe and Asia, Scania trucks will continue to reign as some of the most trusted and well-regarded vehicles on the road. In the end, it's not about Scania's trucks being inferior or unsuitable for the US market. It's about the combination of economic, regulatory, and cultural factors that make it difficult, if not impossible, for the company to enter the US market. Until these factors change, it seems unlikely that we will see Scania trucks on American roads anytime soon. But in the world of trucking, anything is possible, and the future may hold new opportunities for this iconic brand.